So today I'm going to be talking about something that's really important to me and that I hope that is important to you all as well, as we all are participants, whether we like it or not. I want to talk about voting, and I want to talk about why Black people need to vote, and I'm going to talk about why our decisions need to be informed correctly. So I'm going to start this off by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not one to participate in this display of patriotism simply because I believe the actions of those in positions of power and legislation directly contradict this ideology. I will be reading off of my computer. My talking points can become a little scrambled, especially when I'm passionate about something. I'll start trying to decipher every little thing, so I made it concise here. So the Pledge of Allegiance reads, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want us all to focus on where it says, for the republic stands for being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is not what's currently happening in our political system. And I just want to call attention to that, because so many people are like, oh, this country, and don't disrespect our flag and don't disrespect our country by not standing up and reciting these things and singing these songs, but it's not happening. These things are not being put into practice. So when people decide to go against the grain and display that they are not pleased, the way people react is very insane, to say the least. But this was written by a socialist minister named Francis Bellamy in August of 1892. I'm going to start off by talking about why it's important for Black people to vote. It's important for us to vote. The Civil War ended in less of a terror. We want honest candidates, and the only way we can get honest and true candidates that really want to propel us into a new way of life, a more seamless and cohesive way of life, is if we start to vote for people and restore the hope in this country. Thank you for listening. I did not mean for it to be this long. I hope you all go out and vote on November 5th, and God bless at this point. Once they were allowed to vote, I'll get into that later in just a second, but the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution, which granted African Americans the right to citizenship. That was passed in 1868, 3 years after the Civil War ended. The 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War ended, states that the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Also, I do want to bring attention to this pamphlet that was given to Black men post-Civil War after the right to vote was extended. I got this from the Library of Congress website. I will put the link to this pamphlet below. Please read it. It says, to the colored man of voting age in southern states, what a colored man should do to vote. To the colored men of voting age in the southern states, as citizens of the United States, you cannot value too highly your right to vote, which is an expression of your choice of officers who shall be placed in control of your nearest and dearest interests. First of all, you're giving this pamphlet to people who cannot read. Second of all, if you cannot read, the literacy level and the ability to understand the gaslighting that is going on in this first 2 to 3 sentences is crazy. We are in an abusive relationship with the United States government, and this gaslighting has continued on from generation to generation to the point where we now, as young people who have full right to go and vote, are not exercising our right because we think this is all a fluke. This is not a game. Make your voice heard on November 5th, because if it wasn't that serious, they wouldn't be voting either. And they would be giving out pamphlets to the people who vote for them and telling them not to take it too seriously either. In 1965, the grandfather clause was struck down. So from 1870 to 1915, there was a clause in the right to vote that stated that you could not vote unless your grandfather voted. And 9 times out of 10, your grandfather had to be a citizen or a free man to vote. And that was not the case for majority of African Americans living in this system post-Civil War. So this prevented a lot of African Americans the liberty to vote under this loophole. Poll taxes, literacy tests, fraud, and intimidation all turned African Americans away from the polls. Payment of a poll tax was a prerequisite to the registration for voting in numerous states until 1965. The tax emerged in some states of the United States in the late 19th century as a part of Jim Crow law. Poll taxes were imposed on all citizens. This directly affected African Americans as we were generally without financial resources due to the post-slavery legislation that kept our people in financial bondage. In 1964, only 60 years ago, the 24th Amendment eradicated poll taxes. Our grandmothers and our grandfathers were alive to experience their mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles be turned away from the polls due to the inability to pay these poll taxes based on these discriminatory laws. So you can just only imagine the effect that that has on our older generation of people when we don't take it seriously. Shortly after the March on Selma, this is when Dr. King marched with African American citizens to a courthouse in Alabama to register citizens to vote and were subsequently beaten by law enforcement. Shortly after this, the Voters' Right Act was passed by the U.S. Attorney General. Voting Rights Act prohibited voting practices and procedures, including redistricting plans and at-large election systems and voter registration procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. The Voting Rights Act provides protections for voters who need assistance, reason of blindness, disability, or inability to read and write. Any such voter may be given assistance by a person of the voter's choice other than the voter's employer or agent of the employer or officer or agent of the voters' union. So if you are with disability, your employer cannot send somebody with you to vote because your employer may influence that person to not vote in your best interest. You have to choose the person that you would like to help you advocate for yourself. It also requires certain jurisdictions to provide bilingual written voting materials and voting assistance regarding covered minority languages. This Voting Rights Act also requires the state to take certain steps to make sure the voting process is accessible to people with disabilities. The federal election examiners and officers for certain jurisdictions where there is evidence of attempts to intimidate minority voters at the polls. There are supposed to be people there to help protect your right to vote in places where it has been proven that your right to vote is being infringed upon due to racial, socioeconomic, or disability status. Congress extends these provisions. They were extended in 1970, 1975, 1982, and most recently in 2007 for 25 years. These are amendments to the Constitution. They are on the ballot every so often. We need to be paying attention to every single election because one election can cost us our voice. Now I'm going to go into the candidates and why I believe in candidate Vice President Kamala Harris and distinctions between the two of them. So Kamala Harris was the former district attorney for San Francisco from 2004 to 2011, former Attorney General of California 2011 to 2017, was a U.S. Senator of California from 2017 to 2021 when she was nominated Vice President. Kamala Harris is a lady of the law. apparently. I am not necessarily a fan of how laws are structured in the United States due to our complicated history, but I do believe that laws can be changed if we as a people are involved in our democratic system and we go out, get our voices heard, and we participate in our government instead of just being bystanders and passively participating every 4 years. Kamala's action in each position that she has held was performed with some sort of integrity. People disagree with being held accountable, so it can lead to feeling persecuted. But there are myths about her mass incarceration of Black men, and those tales are false. Less than 2,000 cases were overseen by her office during her tenure as district attorney for San Francisco, and only 2% of those cases led to convictions, and none of them were simple marijuana possession. Her Back on Track Reentry and Diversion program offered first-time non-violent and other low-level offenders opportunities to avoid conviction by offering individualized support, mentorship, job training, that individuals can enroll in school or find work while performing community service. Only 10% of the people who enrolled or participated in the Back on Track program ended up reoffending. I think that's very important to look at, especially when you consider how small of the amount of cases. So you're saying thousands and thousands. It was only 2,000 that were tried, and none of this information given has on who or what race people who were being who were accused of offense. There's no data on what race they were, and so to take such a small amount, inflame it, and then on top of it only pin it on Black people to smear the reputation of a candidate is wrong. And it also feeds the stereotype that not only are Black people are criminals, but it also feeds the gaslighting that we've been fed, that we should not be voting, or that the candidates that are on the ballot are against us. It misinforms our community greatly, and we do not get the chance to make the correct and choice because we have been misinformed. Only 10% of the people who participated in the Back on Track program went on to reoffend. Harris believes in using the resources that we have at full disposal, we can change our communities from the inside out. Education is important to Vice President Harris. In her book, Smart on Crime, Vice President Harris states, "We owe every child an education, and we owe ourselves the additional inoculation against violence and crime that fighting truancy can bring." She is speaking of during her tenure as district attorney of San Francisco. She directed that her office find parents whose children were consistently missing elementary school. Parents were not jailed, and the fines levied, while annoying, were small and rare. Truancy dropped by 33%, but there were cases that were mishandled, such as the case of Cherie Peoples, whose daughter was missing school due to hospitalizations for illnesses. Now, everything can be perfect, and if somebody makes something or tries to implement a law, unfortunately there's going to be a lot of trial and error. And if I feel like her integrity was in the right place, but there are other ways that we can implement them, unfortunately, fining people and not really looking into the nuances of socioeconomic status and how available parents can be in the household when they have to work tirelessly to even provide the household, that can be a flaw in legislation that may seem like it's being tough love or tough on things or even smart. But I do think that we can allow these moments to be teachable moments that help us say, okay, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we did. It didn't really work. What can we modify to get to a better place? But we cannot just completely just discount the effort just because it didn't quite work perfectly. So truancy dropped 33% at the time. While every campaign cannot be seen through as we dream, I still believe that Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris's commitment to education is sincere and reflects in her choice of her running mate, former high school educator and governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. The National Education Association president Becky Pringle states, Governor Walz is known as the education governor because he has been an unwavering champion for public school students and educators and an ally for working families and unions. As a high school teacher and NEA member himself, Walz is committed to uplifting our public schools. Public schools are important. Everybody can't pay for private schools, and private schools only teach a very limited curriculum, and it doesn't really open the doors for a diverse learning experience. Harris and Walz's vision wants to focus on family support, such as cutting the cost of childcare, free breakfast and lunch for all students regardless of family income, well-resourced public schools, and affordable college. Kamala Harris refused to So education is important to these people. We have a former high school teacher. His wife is also an educator. And then we have Vice President Kamala Harris, who is pushing for our schools to be funded. I don't know where you guys are living, but in most places in America, schools are being underfunded. Education and resources are being stripped away from our students. And it's leading to a decline in just literacy in general. Like, it's not even about being able to read, it's about being able to understand what you're reading, being able to understand nuance, being able to read between the lines, being able to use a level of thought that is not one way. And I feel like a lot of the issues that we have today, even with adults, even within these conversations, all boils down to a literacy problem that we're having. So education is something that I value, and I would like a presidential candidate to value that as well. Harris refused to seek the death penalty against a young man who was accused of shooting and killing an officer in San Francisco in 2004 and stood firmly on her position despite backlash from other California positions and law enforcement advocacy groups. If you're pro-life, you cannot be pro-death penalty. I'm sorry. You cannot. You cannot. And I am pro-choice. I believe everybody has a right to choose. It's not up to us to persecute somebody's life. Kamala is a supporter and advocate of reproductive and women's health rights, stating every woman in every state must have reproductive freedom and access to health care that they need. This is why I have fought to lower care costs and protect the ability of every woman to make her own decision about her own body. President Biden and I stand with the majority of Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, who support access to contraception, and we continue to call on Congress to pass federal legislation that restores reproductive freedom nationwide. This is from her statement. It's on the White House website. I will put the link there. You can read it yourself. This is her statement about her stance on reproductive rights, for the right to contraception and other things that encompass a woman's right to her bodily autonomy and bringing life into the world. I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is on a very dangerous campaign track. Starting with Project 2025, a dangerous exploitation of non-white male and working class citizens. Project 2025 aims to defund the Department of Education and the Affordable Care Act, eliminate worker protections and unions, ban curriculum around the country's complicated and unaddressed history, deregulate corporations and oil industry entities, remove protections of LGBTQIA rights, end climate and environmental protections, cut Medicare, and pack the Supreme Court with justices who uphold the ideals that have been the downfall of this country while averting accountability. Like, we cannot roll back the hands of time and act like these things that just did not happen. We cannot. And then we just live in a space where all of the politicians just want to avoid accountability and act like these things didn't happen, and act like after these things didn't happen, there were roadblocks weaved into the fibers of this country that still prevent people from self-actualizing here. I do not like to use the term left or right wing. I believe there's a spectrum, and on this spectrum is where we all live as citizens. This is where we take our stance. This is how we vote. This is how we participate in our government. And on this spectrum, I believe there are people who seek to make America a place where all citizens and inhabitants have equal and fair opportunities to a life where they feel safe and can self-actualize in a way that contributes to the healthy and upward evolution of humanity. I believe there are people who straddle the fence of right and wrong, and for personal, professional, and financial gain, who never really care what happens as long as they can benefit incentives and loopholes and positions of power. And I then believe there are people who uphold ideas that feed the system of greed and discrimination of peoples due to race, color, religion, sexuality, and creed, to ensure that everyone does not succeed. Project 2025's proposals, if and when enacted, will ensure that the average American by socioeconomic status and minority ethnic classification, particularly Black people, will never see what is described to us as the American dream. We will be living in a complete nightmare. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. That is completely unacceptable, especially for what he's been convicted of. Convicted felons cannot vote, or there are a lot of restrictions around their right to vote. Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and only in the District of Columbia, Maine, and Vermont, felons never lose their right to vote, even while being incarcerated. So that's 2 states, and then the capital. The capital is not really a state. It's like, I forgot what they call it, but we're not getting into that right now. In 23 states, felons lose their voting rights only while incarcerated and receive automatic restoration upon release. In Maryland, convictions for buying or selling votes can only be restored through governmental pardons. In 15 states, felons lose their right to vote during incarceration and for a period of time after, typically while on parole and probation. Voting rights are automatically restored after their time has been completely served. And former felons may have to pay any outstanding fees, fines, or restitution before their rights are fully granted back to them. In 10 states, felons lose their rights to vote indefinitely for some crimes or require a governor's pardon for voting rights to be restored, face an additional waiting period after completion of sentence, including parole and probation, or require additional action before voting rights can be restored. So there's so many restrictions on someone who is a convicted felon to even vote. So that fact that we have somebody that is a convicted felon running for president is insane to me. It's not fair, and I do not think or believe for a millisecond that a convicted felon and someone who has committed treason against the country, treason, this is not just like, oh, speaking out against a president. No, this is like actually trying to take the rights and liberties and endangering the entire country. This is something that's seen as completely unacceptable. And we have Donald Trump, who has done this, and he's being allowed to run for president, and he's being taken seriously. I believe this is a very pompous display of disrespect to the American people, the idea of democracy that is the embodiment of the U.S. Constitution. This is my U.S. Constitution book from 7th grade. This is the Constitution. I have a copy in my house. This is like some study guide worksheet that I got. I don't know if you can see it, but that's it. I have it. Like, it's a disrespect to the American people, the idea of democracy that is the embodiment of the United States Constitution, and it's a bold display of white privilege. Former President Barack Obama was called unpresidential for wearing a beige suit on Easter Sunday, but Donald Trump can be called to court on charges of voter tampering, treason, the overturn of information that compromises this nation's safety to God knows who knows what was in those files that were in his bathroom, in his house, that he stole from the Capitol and took and was holding on planes. What were you going to do with that information? And then to turn around and to be running for president and to have people endorsing you, that's insane. That would never happen if this was anyone else, especially a person of color. This is why I need y'all to wake up. And I'm not talking about that fake ass woke shit that everybody be talking about. I'm talking about really open your eyes and open your ears. Sexual assault and other untrustworthy and despicable acts, and no one is truly shining a light on his inadequacies as a leader. Being a business shark is not enough equipment to foster change in a country being crushed by capitalism and division. For those who do not know the meaning of capitalism, capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. This is why you see people like Elon Musk at Trump rallies, and he doesn't even go here. Wasn't even born here. He is not an American citizen. But you see him here at these rallies advocating for Donald Trump because the survival of America rests on big corps that undervalue the contributions of the citizens. And when you undervalue the contributions of the citizens, or undervalue the citizen in general, you do not pour into their health, their education, or their overall well-being. Donald Trump is audaciously cheating the system, being tactless, and acting with no behavior whatsoever, violating the rights of others and acting with no morality. I find that not to only be extremely unpresidential, but dangerous. It's time that Donald Trump and people like him are ousted out of our government, and we have the power to do this by showing up next Tuesday, November 5th, to cast our votes. More than just the president is on the ballot this election season. And with a whirlwind of backpedal, I believe it is our best interest as a nation and as black people and other people of color to vote against Donald Trump and his constituents. A total of 468 congressional seats are up for election on November 5th, 33 Senate seats, and all 435 House of Representative seats. If we do not want a gridlock term with our presidential pick, we must elect people who align with President Harris, as well as electing her and her plan to get this nation on the right track. Those people don't happen to be Republicans by any means. Donald Trump is openly racist, and I do not care how many times he says, "Oh, I love people, and oh, I love them, and they love me." he's insulting people, and he's allowing people that advocate for him to offend groups of people at a time, multiple groups of people. Everyone watching this video can quote a time or two where Donald Trump has demonstrated prejudice. Donald Trump publicly called for the execution of the Central Park Five in 1989. He unironically has stated that he will implement the stop and frisk protocol nationwide, previously used by his constituent Rudy Giuliani during his tenure as the mayor of New York City, that permitted search and seizure of citizens in inner city New York without reasonable suspicion. This disproportionately affected African Americans and other people of color and was later considered unconstitutional. Donald Trump also pledges to give law enforcement officers immunity of prosecution. With police brutality on a consistent uptick, I do not understand why so many black men or black people in general are rooting for Donald Trump. You are the main target of this type of legislation. I and everyone else who has skin of color. We are the targets of this type of legislation. We should not be backing candidates that are aspiring to contribute to our complete demise. There is no exceptions to the rules, and most black men do not have the covering of money or power to avoid the unfortunate circumstances that they may be encountering when coming in contact with law enforcement. Every interaction with law enforcement is equivalent to doing the tango with life or death. That is the harsh reality, and if given immunity, law enforcement officers who are not even held accountable to the fullest extent of the law in the present day will not have to even bear the consequences of their actions if they were to take a life. This will allow them to ruthlessly terrorize our communities, and to top it all off, Donald Trump wants to use the military to inhibit the First Amendment right of the American citizens by destroying our right to protest and to say things about these things. If we do not use our voices, we will eventually be a people without a voice, and people with no voice can no longer speak or scream when they need help. Donald Trump packed the Supreme Court with Christian extremists that have diligently been rolling back our liberties. The overturn of Roe versus Wade and affirmative action, and even the discussions to overturn the ruling on the Brown versus Board of Education case, demonstrates the Republicans' agenda, a world where there is only power and subservience without choice. There is no perfect candidate, just like there is no perfect human, but I do believe that we all are owed the right to make informed decisions. I have linked all of my research in the description box. I can only hope that this message reaches people who have not yet cast their vote and were truly misinformed about what's at stake this election season. I pray we all do not experience what we felt on November of 2016, throughout the duration of the Trump presidency, and on January 6th, 2020. Please go out and vote. And if you are in Illinois, you can register to vote all the way up until Election Day. It is not too late. If you live outside of Illinois, please check the guidelines within your state. And if you are registered to vote, please understand it is your civic duty. It is your duty to vote. Our ancestors fought, pled, and died for us to be heard. Please speak up this election season and do not let your vote be swayed by misinformation and stimulus checks. The stimulus check thing is so beyond me. We got stimulus checks when Obama was president. Our parents got them. The economy needed to receive stimulation. So we got the stimulus checks. The economy needed to be stimulated the same way during the pandemic. And the stimulus check thing is another discussion. It's because sometimes, I feel like during that time, during the pandemic, people preyed on the vulnerability of the citizens during that time, and preyed on our unpreparedness. And so those checks were given, but that money was given right back to the economy. It was circulated because people were in need. So the stimulus checks of 2020 or during the pandemic is a very delicate topic that I just don't feel like discussing right now. But what I can say is, like, that's not the reason to vote for somebody. You don't sell your soul for $1,200. I'm sorry. And I will not be voting for Donald Trump simply because of $1,200. And I don't believe so. I don't believe that you should do so either. Please go out. Please vote. Please speak up. Please exercise your right. It is very important in this season and for every season. We need to get out of this cycle of choosing less of a terror. We want honest candidates, and the only way we can get honest and true candidates that really want to propel us into a new way of life, a more seamless and cohesive way of life, is if we start to vote for people and restore the hope in this country. Thank you for listening. I did not mean for it to be this long. I hope you all go out and vote on November 5th, and God bless at this point.